The Navy's newest nuclear submarine, the Thresher, is launched at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. The 278-foot craft is the first of a new class of attack subs designed to operate deeper and more silently than previous undersea craft.
On the morning of April 10, 1963, the USS Thresher, the most advanced nuclear-powered attack submarine in the world, slipped beneath the waves off the coast of Cape Cod. Sleek, silent, and deadly, it represented the pinnacle of American engineering, a weapon designed to dominate the oceans during the height of the Cold War. On the surface, it was just another test dive, a routine maneuver to prove the submarine's strength. But beneath the calm Atlantic waters, an invisible countdown had already begun. What really happened to the Thresher that day? Was it simply doomed by flawed engineering, or was there something more? Something the Navy never wanted the world to know. Stay with us as we find out. The USS Thresher was no ordinary vessel. Commissioned in 1961, it was the most advanced nuclear-powered attack submarine in the world, built to dive deeper, move faster, and operate more quietly than anything before it. To America, it symbolized unmatched naval supremacy during the height of the Cold War. To the Soviets, it was a shadow beneath the sea, an invisible predator prowling the depths. On that fateful morning in April 1963, Thresher left the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, accompanied by the submarine rescue ship Skylark. The mission, a deep dive test to push the vessel to its limits. The seas were calm, the sky clear, and confidence was high. Communications between the Thresher and Skylark started normally. Brief check-ins, routine status updates. Nothing seemed amiss. But then, without warning, Thresher's messages shifted in tone. At 9:13 a.m., a chilling transmission crackled over the radio. Experiencing minor difficulties, attempting to blow main ballast. The words were clipped, strained, and then silence. No more signals came. The ocean swallowed the submarine whole. Back on shore, families waited in agony as hours turned into days. Rumors spread, newspapers speculated, and the Navy eventually confirmed the unthinkable. Thresher had been lost with all hands. It was, at the time, the worst submarine disaster in American history. The official explanation came quickly, too quickly for some. The Navy declared that a piping failure had caused a leak in the engine room, leading to a reactor shutdown, loss of propulsion, and eventual implosion under immense water pressure. A simple mechanical failure, tragic yet unavoidable. But was it really so simple? Even in the earliest days, survivors' families whispered that the Navy was hiding something. Witnesses recalled how abruptly the press conferences ended, how questions were brushed aside, and how technical experts seemed unconvinced by the neat conclusion. The wreck lay 3 miles below the surface, inaccessible to investigators, and the truth, whatever it was, remained locked in the abyss. For years, the official story went unchallenged. But then, quietly, decades later, the first cracks began to appear. Declassified documents hinted that what doomed Thresher wasn't just a leak. It was a catastrophic chain of failures, compounded by secrecy, negligence, and perhaps even something more sinister. When the Navy released its sanitized explanation, it described the loss of Thresher as almost inevitable, a tragic accident caused by equipment that simply failed under pressure.
It's beginning to sink in. Still difficult to believe.
But the newly unearthed files tell a very different story, one of cascading errors and decisions that, taken together, made disaster nearly certain. According to the transcripts, Thresher's problems began long before its final dive. Engineers had already raised concerns about the submarine's silver-brazed piping joints, which were notoriously prone to cracking under stress. These joints ran through critical systems, seawater pipes, coolant lines, and more. If one failed at depth, the results could be catastrophic. Yet despite repeated warnings, the Navy pressed forward with its tests. On April 10th, deep beneath the Atlantic, that warning became reality. A pipe is believed to have burst, spraying seawater into the engine room. Automatic safety systems should have compensated, but the submarine's nuclear reactor unexpectedly shut down, plunging the vessel into darkness. Without power, Thresher was no longer a predator. It was prey, sinking fast toward its crush depth. The crew tried everything. They sent out that desperate message about blowing ballast tanks, a last-ditch effort to rise. But here again, the declassified records tell a darker tale. The compressed air system, clogged with moisture from poor maintenance, froze when activated. Instead of filling the ballast tanks with gas to push the submarine upward, the valves jammed. Thresher continued to sink, helpless. At 9:18 a.m., sonar operators aboard Skylark heard the sounds they would never forget. Metal groaning, snapping, and finally, a thunderous implosion. The pressure at that depth exceeded 8,000 pounds per square inch. The submarine shattered into hundreds of pieces in an instant. No one aboard survived. The Navy assured the public that lessons would be learned, safety protocols improved, and the loss honored with reform. But buried in those assurances was an omission. The Thresher disaster was not an unforeseeable accident. It was the direct result of overlooked warnings, rushed testing, and systems unready for the realities of the deep. Yet, the deeper mystery remained. If this was all there was to the story, why did the Navy keep so many details classified for decades? What else lay hidden in those files that made the truth worse than expected? In the days following the Thresher's destruction, the Navy wasted no time in shaping the narrative. A court of inquiry was convened, statements were released, and within weeks the conclusion was broadcast. The submarine's loss was due to a piping failure, compounded by reactor shutdown. It was presented as a simple case of engineering limits being tested too far. Families were told to take solace in the idea that their loved ones had died in service to progress, that future submarines would be safer because of these lessons. But even then, whispers of doubt circulated among engineers, officers, and even some in Congress. If it was truly just a piping failure, why the extraordinary secrecy surrounding the hearings? Why were transcripts sealed for decades? Why were families given so little information that many felt shut out of the truth? What was most troubling was how the official story ignored earlier reports. As early as 1961, naval engineers had warned that the silver-brazed piping joints used throughout Thresher were weak and prone to failure. The submarine's own builder, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, had documented testing problems.
Construction practices and quality assurance programs were established, ultimately ensuring those lost on board Thresher did not die in vain.
Yet, when the vessel was deployed, those flaws remained unresolved. In a climate of Cold War urgency, the Navy prioritized speed over safety. The classified portions of the inquiry files, finally made public decades later, revealed just how flawed the official explanation had been. Yes, a piping failure occurred, but it was only one link in a chain. The reactor shutdown, the ballast blowing system clogged with moisture, the lack of emergency preparedness, these combined into an unstoppable downward spiral. This raised the question, did the Navy truly believe its original explanation, or did it intentionally conceal the broader scope of its failures? Evidence suggests the latter. The Thresher disaster wasn't simply a tragic accident. It was an indictment of systemic negligence. To the families who pressed for answers, the cracks in the Navy's narrative felt personal. Their grief was compounded by suspicion. Were their husbands, brothers, and sons sacrificed not to chance, but to bureaucracy, corner-cutting, and arrogance? The official story had been built to protect reputations, not to reveal truth. As the files came to light, one thing became undeniable. The Navy had concealed the true depth of the disaster for decades. And when secrecy and silence surround tragedy, darker suspicions inevitably grow. When an official story collapses under scrutiny, speculation rushes in to fill the void. For the Thresher, that speculation took a chilling form: sabotage. Could America's most advanced nuclear submarine have been deliberately doomed, not by mechanical flaws, but by human hands? At first, such claims seemed like wild conspiracy, but during the Cold War, paranoia was justified. The Soviets had eyes everywhere, and the Thresher represented a monumental leap in submarine warfare. If Moscow could neutralize it, or at least expose its flaws, they would tilt the balance of power beneath the seas.
Did you believe at this point that Thresher was in trouble? We had dive messages that were overdue.
Some declassified reports hinted at unusual activity in the North Atlantic that very week. Soviet submarines had been shadowing U.S. naval maneuvers, monitoring tests, and prowling the same waters. Could a rival sub have tampered with communications, interfered with equipment, or even deployed experimental countermeasures? The idea seemed outlandish, yet naval intelligence had documented Soviet interest in precisely such tactics. Then there were the anomalies in Thresher's transmissions. Technicians reviewing the garbled final messages noted inconsistencies, moments when signal clarity dropped in ways not entirely explained by depth or weather. Was it interference, mechanical distortion, or something deliberately induced? Even more unsettling were rumors from within the Navy itself. Whistleblowers suggested the inquiry had sidestepped questions about security vulnerabilities. Shipyard workers had unrestricted access during critical refits, and oversight was minimal. Could a flaw have been planted intentionally? If so, by whom? Though no conclusive evidence of sabotage has surfaced, the possibility lingers. Families were left to wonder, did their loved ones fall victim not only to mechanical failure, but to espionage? Or was sabotage merely a convenient myth, distracting from the Navy's own culpability? The deeper one dives into the declassified files, the harder it becomes to dismiss the unsettling idea that the Thresher's fate may not have been entirely accidental. And if sabotage was even possible, what else had been hidden in the abyss of secrecy? When the Thresher went down, the Navy swore the submarine had been conducting nothing more than routine sea trials. But the declassified documents paint a darker picture. Beneath the official veneer of testing was a web of experimental programs so sensitive that their existence was hidden from the very families of the men who died. The Thresher was not merely a submarine. It was a prototype for a new class of nuclear hunters, capable of diving deeper and operating more silently than anything afloat. Engineers had pushed its systems to the edge, experimenting with unproven reactor designs, advanced sonar arrays, and hull structures that were meant to withstand extreme pressure. But many of these innovations were still in their infancy, and safety protocols were often brushed aside in the race to stay ahead of the Soviets. One particularly disturbing revelation concerned Project SubSafe. This safety program, born in the aftermath of the disaster, was never in place while Thresher sailed. In fact, the submarine was being used as a live testbed for the very vulnerabilities the program was supposed to fix. Imagine that. 129 men sent to sea in a vessel already known to be dangerously flawed, all because the Navy wanted real-world data. The experiments extended further. Declassified technical memos hinted at trials involving new communications encryption systems. The Navy was testing ways to transmit signals securely from depths previously unreachable. But these systems interfered with normal operations and may have contributed to the garbled messages received in Thresher's final moments. Was it possible that the very technology meant to strengthen America's defenses sealed the submarine's fate? Other files, heavily redacted, mention sonar calibration exercises designed to test the detection range of foreign subs. Some experts believe Thresher may have been sent into hostile waters without its crew fully aware of the risks, part of a classified experiment in acoustic warfare. If true, the men aboard were not merely test pilots. They were guinea pigs in a silent war being fought below the waves. The families never heard this. They were told their loved ones had died in a tragic but noble accident. Yet the reality suggested something far more chilling. Those men were sacrificed in the pursuit of dangerous innovations, their lives gambled away in a secret arms race. And if the experiments aboard Thresher were so secret, what else might the Navy have kept buried with its wreckage on the ocean floor? For the families of the 129 men aboard Thresher, the Navy's explanation was never enough. Wives were left widowed, children fatherless, parents shattered, and yet, instead of clarity, they received silence, closed hearings, sealed transcripts, cold official statements that left more questions than answers. Almost immediately, families began pressing for transparency. Some wrote letters to Congress, others gathered in groups to demand accountability. But each request met the same wall of bureaucracy: national security. The Navy insisted that releasing details could compromise America's submarine program. To grieving families, it sounded less like protection and more like an excuse to bury the truth. Over the years, the frustration deepened. Widows described being treated as outsiders, denied access to hearings about the very disaster that had shattered their lives. Parents spoke of knocking on office doors, only to be told that answers were classified. For decades, the official line remained unchanged: mechanical failure, no survivors, case closed. But the families never let go. As time passed, their voices grew louder. In the 1990s and early 2000s, some of the classified transcripts began trickling out thanks to relentless Freedom of Information Act requests. What they revealed validated the family's suspicions that the Navy had downplayed the scope of the failures and concealed crucial evidence. Among the most haunting discoveries were the transcripts of sonar operators aboard Skylark. Their accounts detailed the chilling sounds of Thresher's last moments: grinding metal, desperate attempts to rise, and finally, the crushing implosion. Reading those words decades later, families were forced to relive the nightmare the Navy had once kept from them. Still, many questions remain unanswered. Why were warnings about the submarine's flaws ignored? Why was safety sacrificed for speed? And perhaps most damning, did the Navy knowingly place men into a vessel unfit for its mission? For the families, the Thresher disaster is not history. It is an open wound. Their demand for truth is not only about honoring the dead, but also about ensuring such negligence never repeats. And yet, every document declassified seems to raise new questions rather than provide closure, which leads to an even greater revelation, the transcripts that would change everything. For decades, the full transcripts of the Thresher inquiry remained locked away, stamped with the cold authority of top secret. Families begged, journalists probed, and lawmakers petitioned, yet the Navy resisted. It wasn't until persistent legal pressure pried them open that the truth began to bleed out, and with it came revelations that shook even hardened investigators. The transcripts revealed the moments leading up to the implosion in terrifying detail. Crew members aboard the rescue ship Skylark recorded frantic sonar signals, rapid pings, mechanical clatters, and then the fateful words transmitted by the Thresher crew, experiencing minor difficulties, attempting to blow. Those 3 words, attempting to blow, were more damning than anyone had realized. According to the testimony buried in the transcripts, the ballast system had long been known to malfunction in cold waters. Engineers testified that moisture inside the compressed air lines could freeze, blocking valves during emergencies. Yet no permanent fix had been applied. The Thresher's crew had been sent to the ocean's crushing depths with a lifeline that engineers already knew might not work. Other testimony uncovered an unsettling truth about the nuclear reactor. A shutdown procedure was initiated when seawater flooded into the engine room, but the transcripts showed the crew lacked sufficient training to restart the reactor at depth. In other words, they weren't just facing equipment failure, they were outmatched by systems they hadn't been fully trained to manage. The most explosive revelations came from naval officers who described pressure from above. Commanders insisted the Thresher proceed with tests despite engineers flagging safety issues. One line in the transcript read, "Concerns were raised, but it was determined that delays would compromise operational readiness." In plain terms, the Navy chose speed over safety, Cold War urgency over human lives. For the families, reading these words was devastating. The secrecy had not protected national security, it had protected reputations. Their loved ones had not died in a noble accident, but in a preventable disaster that officials fought to bury. The transcripts tore apart the carefully crafted illusion the Navy had maintained for decades. What had once been a tragic, mechanical failure was now revealed as a cascade of human error, ignored warnings, and institutional negligence. And behind the omissions, one chilling question lingered. If the Navy went this far to hide the truth about the Thresher, what else had they concealed? The 1960s were a decade of tension, secrecy, and paranoia. The Cold War wasn't just fought in the skies or in space, it raged beneath the oceans, where nuclear submarines stalked one another in silent duels. The Thresher, as America's most advanced attack submarine, was both a weapon and a symbol. Its loss was not only a tragedy, but also a potential embarrassment that the Navy could not afford. That is why, as declassified documents suggest, a cover-up may have been orchestrated from the very beginning. Admitting that the Navy's crown jewel was flawed would hand propaganda victories to Moscow. Revealing that U.S. submarines were unsafe could cripple morale and shake public trust. So, the narrative was managed. From the start, officials emphasized the accident as unforeseeable. The transcripts that revealed ignored warnings were buried. Testimonies that highlighted negligence were redacted. Families were kept in the dark under the justification of national security. In reality, the classified status shielded the Navy from scrutiny while protecting the illusion of superiority in the undersea arms race. Even more telling was how the Navy used the disaster to justify sweeping reforms. Project SubSafe, launched in the wake of the tragedy, was touted as a proactive solution, but the timing was suspicious. Why had it taken the deaths of 129 men to implement measures engineers had demanded for years? To many, SubSafe was less an innovation than damage control, a way to assure the public that the Navy was fixing problems it had long known about. The Cold War lens explains much of the secrecy. Revealing the Thresher's flaws risked exposing weaknesses that adversaries could exploit. But over time, it became clear that this justification doubled as a convenient smokescreen. The Navy's silence wasn't only about protecting national interests, it was about avoiding accountability for reckless decisions. The cover-up worked, for a time. The public moved on, the Cold War raged, and the Thresher's story slipped into the background of history. But truth has a way of resurfacing, and when it did, it revealed not just the fate of a submarine, but the darker reality of a military machine willing to gamble lives to maintain its image. And as divers eventually reached the shattered wreckage, what they found provided disturbing physical evidence that deepened the mystery even further. When deep-sea submersibles finally reached the resting place of the USS Thresher, 3 miles beneath the Atlantic, what they found contradicted the Navy's polished narrative. The submarine lay scattered across the seabed in thousands of fragments, a twisted graveyard of steel and secrets. But among the debris, investigators noted details that didn't align with the simple mechanical failure story. The hull pieces showed evidence of catastrophic implosion, yes, but also of stress fractures inconsistent with the Navy's timeline. Metallurgical analysis suggested some structural weaknesses had developed long before the final dive, raising questions about whether the submarine had been fit for sea at all. The very alloy used in key components appeared substandard, hinting at rushed production and overlooked flaws.
We pretty well knew what happened to the Thresher. We mapped her a year earlier. They knew very little about the Scorpion.
Even more unsettling were the remains of piping and valve assemblies. Some were fused in positions suggesting the crew had tried desperately to activate emergency systems. The ballast valves, for instance, appeared jammed mid-operation, consistent with reports of frozen moisture. This meant the crew had done everything right, but the systems had betrayed them at the worst possible moment. Sonar buoys deployed at the site captured chilling echoes of the implosion. Acoustic experts compared the data with simulations and concluded that Thresher did not sink smoothly. Instead, it descended in stages, each marked by mechanical struggle before succumbing in a final violent collapse. This suggested the men aboard fought for nearly 10 agonizing minutes, time enough to realize they were doomed. More disturbing still were traces of classified equipment found in the wreckage. Some fragments matched experimental sonar and communication arrays never officially acknowledged as part of Thresher's design. Their presence implied that the submarine had been testing hardware so sensitive the Navy kept it hidden for decades. If true, the disaster was not just an accident. It was the destruction of cutting-edge technology that no rival was meant to know existed. Divers also noted something the Navy refused to comment on. Certain hull sections bore unusual scoring patterns, as though another object had come dangerously close. Was it a natural effect of the implosion, or evidence of a foreign submarine shadowing Thresher that day? The Navy dismissed such questions, but whispers persisted. In the end, the wreckage was both revelation and riddle. It confirmed mechanical failure, but also exposed deeper layers of negligence, secrecy, and possibly confrontation. The Thresher's grave did not silence the questions. It only made them louder. The tragedy of the USS Thresher was more than a single disaster. It became a turning point, a cautionary tale that still shapes submarine warfare today. In the wake of the loss, the Navy launched Project SubSafe, instituting the most rigorous safety protocols in undersea history. Since then, no U.S. submarine certified under SubSafe has been lost. On paper, the lesson was learned.
Where in their training room they have a picture of the biographies and 8x10s of all the crew members and the civilians that were lost on the Thresher.
Yet beneath the surface, the questions linger. The Thresher exposed the dangers of unchecked ambition, the risks of secrecy, and the price of sacrificing safety to stay ahead in a geopolitical race. Those themes echo today as nations push the boundaries of undersea technology once more. Nuclear submarines are diving deeper, operating with advanced AI and testing experimental propulsion systems. Are we repeating the same cycle of risk that doomed the Thresher? The newly declassified files remind us that disasters are rarely accidents in isolation. They are built over time, layer by layer, through ignored warnings, flawed priorities, and blind faith in systems that cannot fail. The men of the Thresher paid the ultimate price for those choices. The haunting question is whether future generations will be asked to do the same. The wreck still rests at the bottom of the Atlantic, a silent monument to ambition, secrecy, and loss. Each fragment tells a story of desperation and neglect. Each unanswered question a reminder that truth often surfaces only when the cost is irreversible. So what does the Thresher mean for our future at sea? It means that every new vessel launched must carry the weight of its ghosts. It means that safety, transparency, and accountability are not luxuries, but necessities. And it means that beneath the proud steel of every submarine lies a silent warning. The ocean keeps no secrets forever. The declassified files of the USS Thresher reveal more than a tragedy. They expose the hidden costs of ambition and secrecy. What was once dismissed as a simple accident is now understood as a preventable disaster with lessons that echo into the present. Do you believe the full truth has finally surfaced, or is there still more buried beneath the waves? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's untold mysteries.